Well, hello, Nativity Bibleheads. It is Dr. Wayne, and it is time for Power Bible Study. We are doing the text for the Feast of the Epiphany today. Now, technically, this is one of those fixed feast days where it occurs on the same date every year. Christmas is one of those in that it's January the 25th. This one is always on January 6th, which is the day after the 12th day of Christmastide is passed. So even though Epiphany not always doesn't always follow on a Sunday, it is an option of the church to use the text of the Feast of the Epiphany around there as well. The second Sunday, it's like the second Sunday, or the first full Sunday of Epiphany, after Epiphany, the first Sunday after Epiphany is almost always the celebration of the baptism of Christ. So today we have the Epiphany. Now, in the Epiphany text, we have the focus is what happens in Matthew's Gospel with regard to the coming of the Magi. But we do have readings also, yes, from Isaiah 60, verses 1 through 6. Our psalm is from Psalm 72. There's some verses that we don't do there, but it's essentially the whole thing from verses 1 to 14. And then Ephesians 3, 1 through 12. And then Matthew 2, 1 through 12. So let's start with Isaiah. In this portion of Isaiah chapter 60, where we are is in the Trito Isaiah time with the third Isaiah. Remember, we have an Isaiah that represented in the first 39 chapters, which deals with like the 8th century type stuff, and then we have an Isaiah dealing with the exilic community after the exile, during that, and they're dealing with their coming back, like the hope for coming back from exile. What we have here in chapters 56 to 66 of Isaiah is what we might call a Trito Isaiah or third Isaiah. Why? Because it seems to show us a time where they are back in the land after the exile, and the temple's been built, most likely, and but things aren't quite like what they thought they should be as they resume their life in the promised land. And so consequently, we get a word of hope to this community who, like, things aren't quite going as well as they thought they should. You know how many times we have this feeling of, if only I could get back to this, if only I could, we always, there's things in our past that we think like, oh, if I only could get back to that point in my life, things would be so much better again. This is an example of how the people, it really wasn't that. It's like they needed a word of hope that didn't just reach back to the past, but that looked forward. Yeah, here we go. Isaiah chapter 60, verses 1 through 6. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Sound familiar to our themes that we have with our wise men visit, right? Remember, when there was a king, now there was no king. They didn't get to have a king again in the post-exilic time. So consequently, they didn't have that person to look to embody the hopes and dreams of the people. The prophets of this time now are getting a little bit more ephemeral. They're looking toward something more spiritual, okay? Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. The people were expected to be a magnet for the nations. Okay, that was the hope of God all along, and this prophetic exuberance, this preaching is intended to cheer them up to see that they themselves are to embody this light. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from far away, and your daughters shall be carried on their nurses' arms. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. Starting to see themes again, right? Of the Magi coming. Remember, the theme of the Epiphany is the manifestation of God's divine overall plan to the Gentiles. No longer is it anything hidden. No longer is it something to be revealed. It has been revealed. This is the theme, and that's what this prophet speaks to. A multitude of camels shall cover you. The young camels of Midian and Ephah, all those from Sheba shall come. By the way, anytime you see a reference to a multitude of camels, it's another way of saying riches, okay? And notice it mentions the young camels of Midian and Ephah and all those from Sheba. Sheba was considered to be like the far east as you could go, even though it's only like Arabia, but that's the way they thought. They shall bring gold and frankincense. What's the deal with gold and frankincense? It's just something that you bring to show honor to somebody who you consider to be a royalty, okay? Basically, that's what we have in this context here. They shall bring gold and frankincense and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord. Yeah. So you get that? The idea that Israel's God would be that thing that was so manifest in the ways of the people that it drew the nations to them, okay? All right, let's move along to our psalm response in Psalm 72, okay? Now, Psalm 72 is one of those psalms where it's a prayer for the king. It's a ritual, a royal psalm. It's probably used at a king's coronation, kind of a thing. And that's not an unusual genre with regard to the psalms. But this one, oh, I'm sorry, I think I misled you. It does have 20 verses, but we are only doing verses 1 through 7 and 10 to 14, okay? All right, here we go. Give the king your justice, O God, and your righteousness to a king's son. Whenever a new king was enthroned in Israel, there was a coronation, a celebration, a ritual that the people would lift them up and proclaim the recognition of this. And the king was always considered to be a son of God. This wasn't uncommon, actually, in the ancient Near East, and certainly wasn't unknown to Israel. So, where it says, "And your righteousness to a king's son," this is when that person became king. That's when that elevation was seen to have happened, right? May he judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. The king, by the way, was supposed to always be the embodiment of what God wanted for the people, okay? They didn't have any idea of what democracy was back then, and we hold democracy as some divine order thing. The Bible doesn't know anything about democracy. All it knows is monarchy, and the fact that when that king there is supposed to be benevolent, is supposed to be somebody who is always righteous, someone who is always supposed to have the best interests of all the people in mind all the time. That's right. That's why he says, "May judge your people with righteousness and the poor with justice." Your poor. May the mountains yield prosperity for the people, and the hills in righteousness. May he defend the cause of the poor of the people, give deliverance to the needy, and crush the oppressor. So in addition to all of that, with regard to the poor and the needy, the widows, orphans, crush the oppressor, to defeat the enemies that seem to prey upon the lesser citizens of the nation. These are the ideals of leadership. Certainly, we don't have a monarchy in our American experience today, but what we do get here is guidance for that one who is given that power. Okay. May he live while the sun endures, and as long as the moon throughout all generations, seen to be as the eternal structures, right? The sun and moon, parts of God's creation. May he be like rain that falls on the mown grass, like showers that water the earth. Lovely little picture there, is it not? In his days, may righteousness flourish and peace abound until the moon is no more. Which means forever. Perhaps we're getting a picture of a new apocalyptic, the idea that the moon there may come a time where the moon is no more. We don't need to go necessarily all that, but the idea here is that the king is the embodiment of all of the ideals of God. Okay. Verses 8 and 9 get skipped in our reading, in our worship, but I'm going to go ahead and read them here. May he have dominion from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. May his foes bow down before him and his enemies lick the dust. Okay. So why are these excluded from corporate worship? Because it's a couple of those verses. They tend to turn people a little bit sideways, all right, and demand some explanation. Dominion from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. It might occur for some as a bit triumphalistic and a bit lopsided in its leaning. The idea. Notice verse 9. May his foes bow down before him and his enemies lick the dust. To lick the dust, it doesn't mean you're literally putting your tongue to the ground. It means that when you bow properly, in the way they did that in the Middle East, your face actually did touch the ground. Okay, that's the way. That was the prayer position. That was the way of doing obeisance. So consequently, that's the expression, and it's not an attempt to show that other people are unworthy and they have to eat dirt because they're just bad people. That's not where it's going. All right, getting back on track, 10 to 14. May the kings of Tarshish of the isles render him tribute. May the kings of Sheba and Seba bring gifts. These references to Tarshish and Sheba were the known eastern or the known western and eastern limits of the known world. Okay, remember they hadn't known the voyages of Magellan and Balboa and Christopher Columbus. They didn't have this knowledge. So consequently, these are poetic references to the ends of the earth. Okay, west the Tarshish, east Sheba. Okay. May all kings fall down before him, all nations give him service. Sound familiar? For he delivers the needy when they call, the poor and those who have no helper. Again, those themes of kingship and what king is supposed to be. The idea of king being unchecked power didn't exist, back then. In Israel's understanding of king is supposed to be the embodiment of what God wanted for the people and the justice of the people. The same way we think of our public servants should be after our own interests. This is the way they thought of the king. He has pity on the weak and the needy and saves the lives of the needy. From oppression and violence, he redeems their life, and precious is their blood in his sight. The blood is always a metaphor for life. Okay, so the idea is that the king is concerned with all people prospering. Okay. All right, we're moving on now to our New Testament readings. We're going to do Paul's reading from Ephesians. Now, Ephesians chapter 3 is one of those, this particular portion of it is one of the portions that argue for people that, you know what, this probably or very likely could be an authentic epistle of Paul. There's a lot of scholarly debate over whether or not it's authentically Pauline, but this is one of those chapters that argues for it. You'll see why. Verses 1 through 12 of Ephesians chapter 3. This is the reason that I, Paul, am a prisoner for Christ Jesus, for the sake of you Gentiles. Now, remember, you got to keep in mind, Paul's former life as a Jew was well known. Paul's commissioning or conversion, some people call it, to become a missionary to the Gentiles, an apostle to the Gentiles, is well known. And his commitment to the preaching of the word outside of Israel to the ends of the world is well known. This is the context that we need to understand how Paul understood himself and how he wanted people to be, he wanted to be clear how people understood him, okay? For this is the reason that I am a prisoner for Christ. He was a prisoner, remember, on multiple occasions, actually. So this isn't just like a reference to his imprisonment at the end of his life in Rome, the house arrest thing. This is most likely something that happened in the earlier middle part of his preaching. The book of Acts speaks of at least 2 or 3 imprisonments. So we're not always sure which one is the context. For surely you have already heard of the commission of God's grace that was given me for you. That's how he describes his, what we call his conversion experience on the road to Damascus. He calls it his commission. And how the mystery was made known to me by revelation, as I wrote above in a few words. Earlier in his letter to the Ephesians, he spoke more about that. A reading of which will enable you to perceive my understanding of the mystery of Christ. By the way, that anytime we see this word, the mystery of Christ, the mystery of God, God's mystery, the word in Greek is mysterion, and it becomes formalized as specifically referring to how God's manifestation had previously been withheld from the Gentiles, but now fully revealed. So the mystery of Christ has to do with the experience from the Gentile side of things. In former generations, this mystery was not made known. Just a second here. Yes, the word mystery there, it actually is not there. It's a referent, but refers to mystery. In former generations, this mystery was not made known to humankind, as it has now been revealed to his holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit. That is, the Gentiles have become fellow heirs. Remember, when you are a Jewish person, as Paul was, there is this experience of God specifically revealed himself through us, and when his Messiah comes, it now is revealed that, oh, it's not a secret. God actually loves everybody, and it's time for everybody to know that. Okay, this was very important to Paul. That is, the Gentiles have become fellow heirs, members of the same body, and sharers in the promise in Christ Jesus through the gospel. Of this gospel, I have become a servant according to the gift of God's grace that was given me by the working of his power. Remember, he had previously been a persecutor of the church, and so consequently, Paul's experience is that he had a special revelation of the resurrected Christ, and that's what redirected his passion in life. Always for God, but now for God's revelation in Jesus. Verse 8, although I am the very least of all the saints, this grace was given to me to bring to the Gentiles the news of the boundless riches of Christ, and to make everyone see what is the plan of the mystery, that word is hidden for ages in God who created all things. This is his theology of the fact that it was God's plan all along for salvation for everyone. It's just that now there's no doubt, okay? There's no doubt whatsoever of what God is up to and who is included in God's own. So that through the church, the wisdom of God in its rich variety might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. This was in accordance with the eternal purpose that he has carried out in Christ Jesus our Lord, in whom we have access to God in boldness and confidence through faith in him. Pauline theology, very much communicated there, and the emphasis, you can see, toward the epiphany of God, the manifestation of God to the nations. Now, we're going on to our gospel, Matthew 2, 1 through 12. This is always the text for Epiphany, no matter what the year. So even though we are, even if we're in year C, which is Luke, we might, this is Matthew, even in the year of Matthew, even in the year of Mark, it's always this passage from Matthew. No other gospel has any reference to what happens in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, here's one of the things we want to get clear. This is a standalone story. Yes, it comes on the heels of a description of Jesus and nativity, but it's not necessarily a part of the nativity, okay? So quite frankly, anytime we have a scene where the wise men are there at the manger with the shepherds, like we have in Luke, there are no wise men in Luke. And so here, in essence, that they do come later, okay? We're not told exactly when, just it says, in the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born. Doesn't say when he was born, but just after. In Bethlehem of Judea, wise men. Now, the word for wise men, technically should be translated something like astrologers or magi. These were learned men who studied the stars, okay? There was a lot going on in the stars those days. Remember, this is before science and everything. And what did people do to look for meaning in the world? They would look up. Yeah, you didn't have much more, you didn't have the internet, right? You don't need to look up stuff. So what did you do? You just looked up and you looked out and you just saw patterns and things, right? Those were considered to be wise men in those days. Not necessarily educated, they could be, but what there was to know in the world, they knew it, okay? And it seems as though when the stars align, right, they saw something in it. Matthew is trying to communicate that those who observed the stars saw that the universe was pointing toward God doing something new and different and universal in a specific place, okay? So, which is to say that these wise men, we're not told where they came from exactly, just from the east, okay? We're also not told how many. We're also not told their names. All of that, as far as number and names, is all tradition that developed later. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? So notice the difference between in the time of King Herod and these people coming from the east who weren't Jewish, coming to Bethlehem and saying, who is this person who's been born King of the Jews? All right. This sets up the basic conflict. King Herod, he was a half Jew. He had served a stint in the Roman army, and he was rewarded with being granted kingship over this portion of the Middle East. And as we come to learn, he's a very jealous king, very like, right, wait a second, I thought I was the king of this area, and now there's somebody saying, some people are saying that somebody's been born king of the Jews. He sees a threat, right? Let us observe how this goes. Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising, and we have come to pay him homage. The star at his right, or the star in the east, could be one of those shooting stars with comet type things. We don't know for sure. But we know that as learned men who studied the stars, they saw something that led them to where they showed up, right? And have come to pay him homage. When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. Yeah, so Herod was threatened, all Jerusalem. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them, where was the Messiah to be born, right? And because if the wise men are going to Bethlehem and to see the King of the Jews, Herod's basically wanting to get some background on all of this, right? They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and this is from Micah, we saw, and I think we had this during Advent. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. Also the word for shepherd there can be translated rule. One of the things that the Messiah was expected to be, not just king, but also a shepherd, or in the ideal sense of what the king was supposed to be. Yeah. Anytime we talk about somebody ruling in Israel, it was always for the benefit of the people and not for their own power. Then Herod secretly called for the wise men, the Magi, and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. This is a bit nebulous. We don't really totally understand how this works, but yet we don't study the stars like they did, right? Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, okay, so the wise men apparently got the news from Herod that, oh, that's exactly what the star is saying. So this was something that became like, folk tale fact, right? Go to Bethlehem. Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage. This was definitely a ploy. Herod was trying to use the Magi for his own benefit to locate exactly, he didn't know where this Jesus was without them locating him for him. Right? When they had heard the king, they set out. And there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen at its rising. So still, that guidance that they had gotten was still there in the gazing of the stars, right? Until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. The joy, remember, we also had a lot of joy with regard to the shepherds. When the angels came to them and said, hey, go to Bethlehem and see, and you'll see a sign, all that, right? Here we don't have a picture of a manger. We don't have the picture of, the dark night in the cold with the stables and the cattle lowing and all. We don't get that. Verse 11, on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. This is probably, in reality, it's probably we got a toddler Jesus here going on. But we're not told specifically, but we're not being told anything of like, oh, he's being suckled in the moon or anything like that. We don't know for sure. But the picture is definitely not the same picture we saw like we had in Luke in the stable. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. There are many who get into theological explanations of what each of these gifts mean. I don't think they specifically refer to anything more than the gifts reflect the perception of what the child was. These were gifts that you give a king. Okay, you can find references in other contexts in the Hebrew Bible to gold and frankincense being given for to kings. It's just something that you did to a king, what you brought to a king, and the myrrh. Known as an embalming thing, but still very costly, okay? Something that's highly prized, something that is definitely not a gift for the masses, okay? And that is the nature of the gifts. They reflect the attitude of the Magi who are coming to visit. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod. The dream is very important. Earlier in Matthew, we had Joseph had received a dream, the information in a dream that told him, don't put away your wife for being pregnant without you. For the child born shall be called Emmanuel and holy and all that. So dreams are very important in Matthew to communicate divine knowledge, okay? And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, because remember, that was the plot. If Herod really thought that they were going to do this, well, why didn't he follow them, right? Well, Herod apparently didn't have a good operations director, right? And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. How many roads are there that go to the east? Not a whole lot. Anyway, the idea here is that there's intrigue, there's interest, and there are machinations going on below the surface because of the kingship of this Jesus represented a threat to the kingship that was put on earth that didn't reflect God's will. The Roman occupation was a disaster for Israel. And remember, they never got back to their Davidic kingship, okay? As is evidence here, Herod's king. That's not the ideal. That's not what they anticipated. That's not what they were desiring, but that's what they got. And so consequently, the hope of the Messiah goes in the direction of someone who is going to supersede the Roman king. And Herod kind of arises as that figurehead. The Herod that we see on the crucifixion at the end of Christ's earthly life, we see him entertained by what Jesus does, and almost in a mocking sort of a way. So the kingship of Jesus always stands in contrast to the kingship that Rome had put in place, and it represents a shift in what the expectations of Israel would be. Not with everybody, which is one of the reasons why Jesus didn't want people to call him king, but this incident of the Gentile wise men coming from the east, they are seen as representing the Gentiles coming to him and the attraction that Christ is for the Gentiles. And it symbolically opens up the way of God, the way of salvation to the whole to the whole world. lest there be any doubt. That's what this is all about. So, happy Epiphany. Until next time, peace.